The camera lights were blinding, the kind that turned faces into pale, floating masks against a sea of shadows. The air inside the Washington ballroom was heavy with perfume, champagne fizz, and that faint electric temps that lingers before a storm. On stage, Meryl Streep stood at the podium, her hand resting on the cool metal edge, about to launch into what was meant to be a carefully prepared, heartfelt speech about the power of art to bridge divides. She had delivered hundreds of speeches in her life on soundstages, in gilded theaters, at award banquets where the air was thick with flattery and ambition. But tonight felt different. This was the annual American Voices Gala, a strange fusion of politics and culture, where senators mingled with singers. Filmmakers brushed shoulders with governors, and cameras caught every flicker of expression. Meryl had been invited as the evening's final speaker, a closing note meant to inspire. Her voice began smooth, controlled, threading between story and conviction. The soul of America, she said, is not just in its laws or its politics, but in its storytellers, in the voices who dare to imagine what could be. Her cadence was steady, her hands making small arcs in the air like a conductor's baton. That was when it happened. A chair scraped loudly from the third row, jarring in the hushed room. A man in a navy suit stood abruptly. Robert Kennedy J. a guest panelist earlier in the night, walked toward the stage with an almost deliberate slowness. Murmurs rolled through the audience like distant thunder. Meryl paused mid-sentence, her eyes following him. "Excuse me," Kennedy said, his voice cutting into the silence like a blade. He didn't shout, but the interruption was sharp enough to snap the air in two. "You don't understand, America." The words hung there, heavy, insolent. Meryl blinked once, twice. There were gasps, a rustle of dresses, someone's wineglass clinking against the table. A stagehand shifted in the wings, frozen between stepping in and staying put. Robert's face was taut with something frustration, as he gestured toward her. "You speak from Hollywood," he said, "from your bubble. But you don't know what it's like for real Americans out there, beyond the coasts. You talk about ideals, but ideals don't put food on the table." Meryl could have stopped him cold with security, with a sharp retort, with silence. Instead, she set her papers down on the podium, folding her hands over them, and in that pause, long still, deliberate, every camera in the room focused on her face. "I see," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "You believe I speak only for some Americans. That I do not understand others." Kennedy nodded, almost defiantly. Meryl's eyes softened not with pity, but with something more dangerous, curiosity. "Then let me tell you a story," she said. And so, without looking at her notes, she began. She told them about growing up in a small New Jersey town, where her mother clipped coupons at the kitchen table, and her father worked himself into exhaustion running a sign shop. She told them about the boy in her class who didn't have a winter coat, and the way she and her mother left one at his doorstep anonymously. She described the smell of iron and oil from the nearby factory, the boredom of a town with one movie theater, and the joy of the church choir that became her first stage. "I've lived in America that struggles," she said, her voice gathering heat. "I've lived in America that mends its clothes because buying new ones is out of the question. And I've lived in America that dreams dreams so hard it can lift people far from where they started." Somewhere in the back, a young woman, in a white dress, an aspiring playwright from Ireland, forward, her eyes wide. This was her subplot in the night, though no one yet knew it. She had come here feeling invisible, a scholarship recipient sitting in the cheapest seat. Wondering if her voice mattered, Meryl continued, weaving in another thread, a story about her early career, when she took a role for less pay than her male co-star, just to get her foot in the door. She spoke of rejection letters, of humiliation, of the sting of being told she was too plain to be a leading lady. And then she widened her frame, speaking of farmers in Kansas losing their land, single mothers in Detroit working double shifts, veterans wrestling with shadows no one else could see. Her words didn't just paint pictures. They opened trapdoors into the heart. She spoke to Kennedy directly now. "Understanding America," she said. isn't about where you stand, it's about who you're willing to stand beside, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's not your fight. Robert's jaw clenched, but something in his eyes shifted. Then came the second subplot, an older man in the audience. Harold, a Vietnam veteran who had never cared for Hollywood types. He had come only because his granddaughter was working backstage. He had spent most of the night checking his watch. But now he found himself leaning in, caught off guard by the raw, unvarnished truth in her tone. She closed with a quiet force. Art, politics, work, these are all different languages. But every language in this country should have one translation: dignity. And if we lose sight of that, we lose the America we both claim to love. When she stopped speaking, the room stayed silent, not out of politeness, but because everyone was suspended in the echo of her words. Kennedy stepped back slowly, his face unreadable, and returned to his seat. The applause began hesitant, then swelled, waves crashing against the high ballroom ceiling. People rose to their feet, not in the automatic way they did at awards shows, but in that rare, reluctant way when they know they've just witnessed something they'll remember for the rest of their lives. By the next morning, the clip had ricocheted across the internet. Headlines blared. Meryl Streep's dignity speech goes viral. Comment sections flooded with arguments, praise, confessions. In Iowa, that young playwright sat at her desk, finishing a script she'd been too afraid to complete. In a small kitchen in Ohio, Harold replayed the video, this time calling his granddaughter to talk about the kind of America he wanted her to grow up in. And Kennedy, he said little publicly. But 2 weeks later, he was photographed visiting a community art center in rural Pennsylvania, listening, not speaking. As for Meryl, she refused to frame the night as a victory or a defeat. It wasn't about winning an argument, she told a reporter. It was about reminding myself, and maybe him, that our stories are the bridges we have left. Sometimes, the most viral thing in the world isn't the clash, it's the connection that happens after the dust settles. And in that echoing ballroom, under hot lights and heavy air, an unexpected conversation had begun, not between two famous people, but between America's many fractured selves, looking for the dignity they all deserved.